So please join me in welcoming Terry Brannon and Bob Shealy. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've got two parts to this. So I'm a home builder, and what I'm going to start going through are the things that I see as a home builder when I'm brought back in after pools are constructed, typically after a house. Sometimes they go at the same time. And as I go through some of this, I'm going to show all the problems that we see. Second part of this will be Terry coming up, and he'll have some responses on how to avoid the issues that I'm going to show, and some of the things that we think through while we're trying to build a pool next to a house. So let's just go ahead and start on that. Preventing pool installation pitfalls. A couple of things I'll talk through, and I'm familiar with the IRC code book in dealing with houses. I didn't even realize there's a pool and spa code book until I was connected with Terry and a group of other people. Rich, I got quite the education on pools, but what I'm relating it to is how a pool affects or can affect a house, if not built according to codes and requirements specific to a house, specifically in this North Texas area where the soils are fairly, they move a lot. I'm going to talk a little bit about line of influence, distance from a house versus pool depth. I'll get more specific on that. Plumbing trenches, which is kind of in line with that. The proximity to a house. The deck placement at foundation, pool deck. Grading, yard grading, direction of flow, and then drainage, just pool decks, how they drain, not just the placement, but how they drain on the property. So I'm going to start going through some pictures of, and these are actual houses that I've seen. Some of them are houses that I've been back and forth to kind of go through. So some of the issues that we see, the biggest one for us as a home builder is the line of influence when we're dealing with the depth of that pool versus the distance of the home. And as you can see, these pools are pretty close. So this one on the right is about 24 inches away from the house. The pool is approximately 8 feet deep. Now that's 8 foot deep to what the pool builder says the pool is 8 feet deep, but you also have your excavation. So when you're factoring your distance from the house to stay out of the line of influence so it doesn't affect the foundation, you have to consider how far off you are to the coping. There's a 6 inch, I guess roughly 6 inches from coping to waterline, and then the excavation as well. So an 8 foot pool is not necessarily 8 foot, it's about 9 foot, 9'6", depending on the thickness and how it was designed. So that's where we start looking at the line of influence. A couple other things, not just the foundation, but also, if you notice the picture on the left, there's a retaining wall that's actually the pool's on top of or inside where the ground is lower outside. That could be a concern. For a home builder, I'm not concerned with the wall because I'm not building the pool, but I'm going to show you another picture here where it kind of covers both. If you look at the picture on the right again, these are all different pools, by the way. It's not the same house. The picture, I said right earlier, picture on the left, again, this one's roughly 30 inches away from the house. We had the ability to measure it. Again, an 8 foot deep pool. So these houses are cutting into that line of influence, which is where that house, the load displacement, ends up being on the pool. And if it's not designed that way, it could be a problem. The kicker on the house on the left is that there's a retaining wall that holds up an HOA area. That wall is roughly 4.5 feet tall in the back corner, but it gets larger as it comes back. It's roughly 2 feet off the back side of this pool. So the line of influence for that wall is somewhere in the middle of that pool, and that could be a problem. And code talks about that, and this is what Terry will kind of get into towards the end. And this is just kind of showing the excavation view, but the rear wall in the house, so it's not just a house, it's a wall scenario that could be a problem. And as you can see up here, when I start talking about deck placement, drainage, as I go through this, Terry's got some diagrams at the end. He's going to cover and show you exactly what that is. Yep. I'm kind of presenting the problems, and he's going to talk about the fixes. Great question, though. So the right side here, basically when that coping gets on, that pool deck's probably going to be flat. I don't know how it drains away from the house. But you can see how close it is, so how they're going to tie the drainage in, I'm not sure. I didn't get to see this one much further. I've got one more picture of it as it gets closer to the end. And here's where they gun at it, but the height. I tried to get a close-up on this house. I apologize, because that entire retaining wall on the left, the right picture, left side, that entire retaining wall, you can't see it, but the pool, the fountains, they go up to the top. There's about 12 inches left between the two, so you've got potential water trap in there. unless they do something to drain it to get the water out, which we didn't see any drains of supply. Doesn't mean they didn't bring them in after. But again, on this side, the left side, you have a sidewall. And this yard is pretty flat around this pool area. So with the retaining wall on the side, you've got water coming over that from the neighbor's property running on the side. My concern is how are they going to run that water away from the pool / the house. Again, being a home builder, I'm more concerned with the house and how that water is affected to it. And I'll get more into that. You'll see some better pictures, close-ups here in just a second. But as a pool builder, when I talk to them, and I'm not advocating being against pool builders at all. I'm trying to educate the ones that we work around, just to take things into consideration that we have to think about in building a home to get water away. Because on this expansive soil, water's a dangerous thing. So just a couple of cases here. These are houses I get to go back to and look at as far as warranty concerns. This is the same house, and you can see about the deck width on the left side just kind of shows how close we are to the house. Now this pool is about 5 feet deep. It's roughly 5 feet away from the house, which the pool guy's conversation with me, and he's a great guy, no offense to him, his comment was, well, we've met the 5 to 5 line of influence. The problem is foundation's lower, which is better scenario for this, but the excavation's 4 feet, not 5 feet to the inside of the pool, so you have to measure back to where that excavation line is. This pool deck drains straight back to the house, again, same house. The thought process was they have drains on the top that are roughly 8 feet apart, 4-inch drain. So I think about our Texas rains, and you get an inch in 5 minutes, right? Where does the water go? And he said all the water goes in the drains. So I popped the hose up there, and as you can see on this scenario, all the water passes basically the drains. It collects down here. And on this right side picture, the chair overlaps pool deck and foundation. So the ottoman of the chair is actually on a foundation that we set up and built, and the deck goes right to it. There's mastic in there, but the mastic is already split and separated, but that's the exact area where it holds water. So when you get into a scenario like that, you can see on the left picture that all that water held in there, we actually swept it off because we don't want to create problems. There's already a separation. It's displaced about 1/4 of an inch high-low. So when that mastic splits, all that water just sits there and runs right inside. And that creates a problem for the foundations. And again, I'm sure it moves the pool deck, but I'm more concerned with the foundation because when that moves up, there's not an easy fix for that. It becomes a much bigger problem. And the right side here is just to kind of show you with the level going across, that water is ponding basically from this gentleman's left foot all the way into this level. But it ponds right along that line. And the idea is to get the water away from the house, right? Because that's what we have to follow the guidelines as far as code in building a house. And Terry will get more specific on the code requirements for that here in just a few minutes. Now here's another pool. Again, this one drains. The line of influence isn't a problem. They built the pool far enough away from the house. The depth was about 4.5 feet, so not a big deal. But they actually tied the pool deck area back where those stools are. They tied it into the foundation. And I can't speak for all engineers, but I know most of the ones that I deal with on a home, they don't want to tie anything into it because they will move differently. You've got a 30-inch typically on a foundation, 28 to 30-inch perimeter beam, interiors as well. And your pool decks are 4 to 6 inches maybe. So they will move differently. When you tie it in, it creates stress on that house and can cause a problem with the house, let alone crack your pool decks. The bigger problem with this one is that it's a great looking pool deck, but they drained the water right back to the house, the edge of the foundation. Now it's a 12-inch trough, and they've got a 4-inch pipe in it, but it's not sealed, so the water going in there, if it makes it to the pipe, it runs out. The pipe inside of there runs into downspouts off the house. The same deck drains that you can see, the little white pop-ups there, it all runs out. But you've got a 12-inch trough with 4 inches, so the rest of that water, the other 8 inches, absorbs in the house. This house is actually lifting. That door right there is a 12-foot sliding unit, no longer operates, which I'm sure the glass could shatter. So the trench, and again, Terry will go over the fixes on this. There's a lot of opportunities to avoid this, even if you have to drain back towards the house or drain away from it. We just need to make sure that we're not, in building a pool, we're not causing an issue with the house, but if we're also doing them together, we can kind of work together as the pool contractor and the home builder to make sure that, you know, builders have the ability to do different things as long as we know up front what a homeowner's going to do, right? So it's not really a pool contractor's issue. The homeowner's got a flat yard, we know that's going to happen. We can actually underpin a house, raise it 6 inches. We can go in deeper. The buyer does pay for that, but then I can raise it up. So now I've got drainage away from the house, roughly 8 to 12 inches. Now a pool contractor can come in here. There's a lot more opportunity to fix these types of situations. This yard was pretty much flat before they built the pool across the back. It drained very little down the sides. Part of the excavation, and I've talked to a few pool contractors, we're friends, but we talk about the excavation and when they come in. So this pool is built pretty close to the side of this house, but it's not a very deep pool, which isn't a big deal. But they dropped it so much, the excavation, on the left side, you might be able to see better where the arrow is, they actually exposed the entire foundation. When I walked up there, I could see the bottom of the beam, and that's a dangerous game. The engineers always want at least 12 inches in undisturbed soil, but 18 unexposed, so we can mitigate water and get it away. When they expose that, even for 3, 6, 9 months, every time it rains or every time it gets hot, like right now, that'll dry out. That house has the potential to start settling in that corner right there. Now, the right side shows the other area, but that was only about an 18-inch piece of dirt that's dropped down about 24 inches. So we're so close to the bottom of that foundation that we actually would expect this to change the foundation and lower itself just because it's going to dry out. I've seen situations like this because the excavation is not designed to drain, it's just kind of cut in. And I've seen water pond around a house and lift them, and that becomes another problem, right? Water is a dangerous thing. So we got to be careful of the excavation. That's why when I talk about line of influence, it's to the excavation, not necessarily a pool depth of 6 feet. It's everything. Oops, they have gone too far. So this goes back to one of the pools I showed earlier. This is the same pool. We've got about 18 inches right here. That piece of concrete is roughly 24 inches. So the depth of the pool is within the line of influence, let alone the excavation. But when I look at this, my first concern is how do we drain this? Now again, I'm not a pool contractor. So we looked for any drains set in this. This is actually on one of the houses that we built. We didn't build a pool, but we had the house. And so I'm looking for drainage, but I'm trying to think, how do they get out on the other end? That's about a 4-inch sliver. Typically your pipe's 3 to 4 inches. So I don't know how they put the drains in after the fact. Now we talked to the pool guy, he didn't have any in there. And so you're building this trap basically up against the foundation. It's lower, right? It's the soil. If you built the soil up and drained on the pool deck, I'm happy. But then the homeowner's not because they're draining that water into the pool, and that creates problems, I believe, with chemicals and everything like that. But so it's a water trap. And then they added irrigation lines into the inside of this, so you're adding more and more water. But it's basically a pocket that holds a lot of water. That can be a problem, again, for the foundation. But on one of these pools I've shown, it just wasn't a problem for the foundation. When it gets landscape traps and things like that, it'll actually start to affect the pool. We have a pool on one of these houses where it's about 36 feet long, I think. It's already out 3 inches from end to end. So not only the house is moving, but the pool is too. So there's a huge effect to both. And we got to make sure we try to get that water out. So we've got the water trap at the foundation we need to avoid. But even if you put in drains every 8 feet or every 6 feet, everything has to make sure it gets that water, those drains. I've seen where the ground is flat just like this, and there's a drain here and here, but where does the water go right here? It just sits, or it soaks in basically, and it gets wetter and wetter and wetter as you go through the wet season, so it becomes a big problem. I could be wrong, but every pool I seem to see, the concrete decks always slope back towards the house, and I'm not sure why that is other than keeping the rainwater out of the pool, but the pool's getting rainwater anyway, so maybe it has to do with fertilizers or anything like that with landscape, I don't know, but we've always trying to get the water to run away from the pool, and Terry's got some things to show you on that along with the line of influence here in a minute. So this is another pool it's actually got this whole pool deck is very flat with the back of the patio on the house. So in heavy rains, this is actually a Houston pool, but it collects a ton of water. And so the buyer was concerned the water was going to get in the house, but I can't help him with that. And then we noticed these drains that are tied in, but they exit right at the edge of the foundation, which is where you don't want water to sit, right against the edge of the foundation. Code always wants you to get water to drain 6 inches and 10 feet, but it's that 10-foot number they always want you to get water away from. So our recommendation here, and again, not being a pool builder, is you need a drain inlet there to capture that water, just to sit on top to get the water out. He's got a downspout right here on the side. You can see there's a pool deck drain. You could easily tie another line in there just to grab that excess water. You're going to have rainwater absorbing in the ground. It absorbs through your decks unless they're sealed, but you're getting that excess off. You don't want it to sit on the foundation. That's where the problems start to occur when you get the lift. So as I kind of wrap up, and again, those were some of the issues I see. Terry will go through on maybe how to fix some of those or do different things. But my thought process here as a home builder is, if I was going to build a pool, I'd want to verify the pool's not built within the line of influence. That is including the excavation depth and width, not just the finish out. I've seen cities where they have a permit. I permitted my own pool and built it myself, but they went off of 8 foot deep. Well, it's roughly 9'6" once you're done with the excavation, but I was far enough away from the house. So they were looking at it, but they weren't looking at it correctly. And then design a grade plan, or at least design the drainage to where you can verify yard drainage, pool decks, whether they slope away from the house or not, but how do we keep the water away from the house, the perimeter of that foundation? When those houses lift, there's really only one way to fix them, it's lift the house. And you're easily looking at $100,000 depending on the size of the house, but an average house right now is probably about 80 grand in piers. Then the amount of work that goes into the inside of that home on cosmetic issues, just from the cracks and things, there's two ways to do that when you pier it. You can go underneath and tunnel, which raises your costs exponentially, probably 12, 15, 20 grand, depending on the size of the house. Or they go straight through the floors on the inside, then you replace everything. But a homeowner can't be there during that. So everybody opts for the more expensive route, which is to go underneath. You can live in the house through the entire process, even when they lift it. But it's a huge expense. We're trying to avoid that. The other thing is to review fences, retaining walls, and neighboring yards, because they all have an effect. And if you've got a neighbor like I was showing with the retaining wall, water coming over, and you don't have good drainage, you're collecting their water on top of your own. So you've got to figure out, it's not necessarily pool guy's responsibility to make sure the neighbor doesn't drain on, but looking at it and knowing it. As a home builder, when we see that, we typically run a drain down the low side of the wall just to avoid problems. It's cheap, it's inexpensive, and it's a Band-Aid that lasts forever. So now my homeowner doesn't have to worry about what the neighbor's doing. I just take that out of the equation because they're going to call me anyway if there's dying grass or retaining wall moving. So maybe pool guys could do the same. Review plumbing excavations, depth and proximity to the house. I didn't have any good pictures of this. But you got your foundation right here, and I've seen plumbing trenches between that house that was 3 feet wide with the flatwork. All the plumbing trenches were in that. And I asked the pool contractor, you guys, I don't know if you can compact it over a plumbing line, but do you pack it in at all? And he says, not really. We just kind of backfill, get it ready, put some sand in, and pour the pool deck. On the building side of this, as a home builder, we have houses that sit low on the streets, and we trench them with utilities. We have to compact those. The utility contractor doesn't, so we'll actually unexcavate that. Because if we don't, when the water absorbs, it hits those channels and goes straight to the house. And they'll have a corner lift wherever those utilities go in. So being mindful of where the plumbing is in comparison to the house and how deep that trench is. Because I've seen trenches roughly 12 inches deep, 10 inches lower in the house, while I'm already 6 inches off the bottom of that foundation beam. And the water's going to migrate there. It's path of least resistance. That's where it's going to sit. That's where it's going to soak in. And the other offset, everything at a cost, but I'm sure it would be passed on to a homeowner potentially, but I'm sure they would rather pay to have a structural engineer review everything just to make sure it has no effect on the house foundation with grading and drainage. Terry's got some good information, but I've seen piers on pools. I've seen piers added to a house before the pool installation. There's a lot of things you can do to avoid this, but everything I've seen showed on these pictures doesn't have any of that tied in with the pool. So maybe having a structural engineer verify that if you're not sure what code dictates or requires for a house. It doesn't matter if it's a pool or a pergola, it's the footer that matters and what is in the line of influence, because you don't want to displace the house load onto something else. It needs to be in that soil. And this is the end of mine, so Terry's going to kind of show you the line of influence, and he'll show you some other issues that deal with how to fix options to mitigate your issues with drainage around the house, on decks, and things of that nature. So I'll pass it over to Terry. Whoops. There you go, sir. I went one too far there.
Check. Is it working? All right. My name is Brannon. I'm an engineer. I did my internship right over here in Irving, so I know something about soils. But I live in Tyler, and that's going from the worst soil in the world to the best soil in the world, because we don't have expansive clay in Tyler or anything like that. But I live in Tyler, and I work in 23 states and foreign countries and all that, doing swimming pool design. So I'm going to kind of coordinate the pictures that Bob showed you with some diagrams and kind of give you an idea of some of the definitions he was talking about. For example, we talked about zone of influence. What is a zone of influence? Well, the zone of influence for a soils engineer or a structural engineer is the area that's impacted by the weight of the building. Now that building, if that's a 2-story building, it weighs 3,000 pounds per lineal foot. That's a lot of weight, and it's running down that length of that foundation. If that foundation's a foot wide, that's 3,000 pounds per square foot right there. Now, the influence line, that is where the bearing is 45 degrees out, okay? And so the farther I go deep, the wider the footprint gets, and therefore it's not 3,000 pounds per square foot anymore. You see, as it gets wider and wider and wider and wider out here, the bearing ends up being like 200 pounds per square feet. We can handle that. Most soils, any soil in Dallas County or Tarrant County can handle 200 pounds per square feet, okay? So that's what the zone of influence is. And so in general, this would not be a problem. You're building your house that way. You've got a typical running beam foundation here, or a bond beam, or a grade beam, and that's the kind of thing you get. The problem is that this is under the IRC, the International Residential Code, by the way. ICC is represented down here. Let me tell you the best kept secret. You can go to ICC Safe, S-A-F-E, iccsafe.org, and you can look at the codes for free. They'll let you even look at them for free. Now, it's better if you subscribe, because if you subscribe, you can do searches on any of the codes. This is the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code, the IRC code. They've got one. Y'all need to see their booth down the way here. The IRC code is that thick, okay? You probably don't want that sitting on your desk, but you might want to look at it online. The information I'm going to show you here comes right out of the IRC. So you're required by IRC to have a space from the foundation, from the finished floor elevation down. By code, it's 4 inches if this is a masonry wall. That's for splash, okay? Water splashing on the soil, up onto the wall. You gotta have a somewhat impervious wall there, or the house gets wet. So 4 inches for masonry, but it's 6 inches for something else. So if you've got plaster, stucco, ephes, wood paneling, vinyl siding, anything like that. There's somebody interfering. If you've got any other siding other than brick or masonry, then you have to have 6 inches clear, and then it falls away from the building 6 inches in the first 10 feet. Now, if you're doing your math, that's 5%, all right? That's 1 foot and 20, 5% grade from the house. That's what's in the code. That's how you're supposed to be building houses. Are you doing it that way? Never mind the swimming pool. This is what you're supposed to be building to, okay? Now, the swimming pool code, it says that the water is supposed to drain away from the pool. In the house code, the IRC says it's supposed to drain away from the house. Okay, now we've got a problem. Because especially when you guys decide that you want your pool right up next to your house, you don't have any place for the drainage to go. And that's what the subject of today's lesson is about. Now, the general rule of thumb is that you build the pool on what we call the 45-degree rule. You go from the foundation finished floor elevation, 45 degrees out. If the pool is 4 feet deep, you need to be 4 feet from the house. That makes sense? 45 degrees. 4 feet. If that pool is 8 feet deep, you need to be 8 feet from the house. That's the general rule of thumb that's always been in existence. It's been around a long time. Don't shake your head like you've never heard this before, okay? This is the way it's always been. But what we've done now is we've gotten into the habit of building these pools up close to the house. I've got builder friends that have built pools touching the foundation, the copings touching the house, okay? And then the other thing that we started doing is we either elevate the beam so it's above the grade, Or we have been doing flush pools, what we call a slot drain pool, where the coping is flush with the water. The water's here, and the coping is here at the same level. There's not 6 inches like Bob mentioned earlier. The way we used to build pools was like this. We had 6 inches of freeboard. Now we're building pools with slot drains, and the slot drain is just flush with the coping, and we have no fall. You see, now you're starting to see the problem. So what we've got to do is we've got to find a system here that we can take care of that drainage from the pool, because we've got to drain away from the pool, and the drainage from the house. Even if you're on the gable end of the house and don't have gutters, you still have water hitting the house, hitting that wall, running straight down into the soil. And you guys that live here in the north central Texas area, all the way down to Houston, you know that water in the soil is not necessarily a good thing when it's next to the foundation because of swelling. The shrink swell potential of the soils around here is 4 to 8 inches. You want your soil swelling 8 inches and lifting your house, and it certainly can do that. Okay? So now we've got 2 conflicting codes. Here's a possible solution, is put a drain out by the pool. This is perfectly legal and it works. However, I would not use what the picture, that I may have to go back to his picture in a minute, the little slot drain that he showed that was next to the house. That's a deco drain. It's 3/4 of an inch wide, 1.25 to 2 inches tall, and it's made out of plastic, and what it is a glorified expansion joint. And the concrete will squeeze it shut eventually if you put it in the middle of a concrete slab. It is not a very good drain material. You may need to go to something a little bigger. Now you can buy this product at Home Depot, so this is not, you know, unheard of here. You can buy this kind of product here, or a Stegmeyer. Several other people make that drain. You can buy it out of concrete. You can get them made out of cast iron. Just about anything you want to. One tip though, don't buy the metal grating. Can you imagine what the metal grating would feel like today in Dallas, 105 degrees? You can get cooked. And I've heard of people getting 3rd-degree burns walking on gratings next to a swimming pool. Foot or 2 away from the swimming pool, walking on the grating and getting burned. So don't use metal grating, use plastic or use stone. You can buy stone grating now, or cast stone that will fit over the gratings that are beautiful, okay? Another solution, again with a raised curb, it works really well with a raised curb. You can put that drain right behind the pool wall. Notice also that I've put an expansion joint. There's 3 structures here. We've got a house structure, we've got a deck structure, and we've got a swimming pool structure, and they all move differently. That house, I said, weighed 3,000, 4,000 pounds per lineal foot of wall. That swimming pool, a typical residential swimming pool, is 500,000 pounds, 500,000 pounds on the ground. Okay, so we got to take care of that differently than we will a 4-inch or 4.5-inch thick deck slab or pavering slab. It's just isolate, isolate, isolate. In this case, I've put an expansion joint next to the pool wall to let this thing move. I'm not too worried about it on this side. I don't necessarily have to have 2 expansion joints, and that narrow distance I can get by with 1 expansion joint. This is the other option, to put it next to the house. This makes Bob shake, and his knees are over here rattling, because he doesn't like this idea. Put drains next to the house. Yes, you can, but they need to be watertight. That needs to be sealed, and that, of course, is a maintenance problem, because that joint's got to be kept sealed forever. And then this drain, of course, is just, it's got to be positive drainage, and it has to discharge to what we call a legal place, okay? Can't just dump it into the neighbor's fence. You know, you can't drill a hole in the fence and let it shoot through. That's not permissible, okay? Another way to do it, and this might be for the example he gave with a rock-filled trench, is to build a concrete trench like this. And then you could fill that up with, this is sort of a detail I have at my house, it's Mexican beach pebble is what it's called. It's gray, round, egg-shaped rock, except it's about the size of an ostrich egg or something. It's 3 inches, 4 inches rock. Very inexpensive. Actually I got it out of McKinney to be delivered to Tyler in Mexican beach pebble. So you can fill that up with rock, or you can put a grate across it. Don't use metal. There's lots of options there. But don't simply build this trench up against the house and let the house serve as one wall. Because if the house serves as one wall, the concrete in the house foundation will wick the water into it. Now you're going to have moisture problems from the trench, okay? That trench needs to be waterproof, okay? Now you could, I don't have a sketch of it, but you could, instead of doing a concrete trench, you could have terminated the concrete here and you could have lined this with a plastic liner, like a landscape pond liner. Firestone makes one, one's called Hypalon, which is like an 80 mil type of product you can put in black plastic that you can fit in the bottom. Go ahead and buy this. It's cheap as all get out. That's what they do on a shower. You're putting shower pans in your houses, but you're not putting the drainage pan in your drainage. Put the drainage pan out there, fill that up with rock, and then you've got a fairly inexpensive way to get the water away from the house. Here's some of those drains. That's Deco drain up the upper left. I'm not a fan, to be honest with you. It works great if you have bunches of them, you know, just all over. But not when you just have one drain and you're depending on that to be your final and best solution for heavy rains. Y'all know what we can get around here. You know, the 100-year flood here in Dallas County, I think, is 9.4 inches in an hour. That little guy up there, it ain't handling 9.4 inches. It's not even gonna handle an inch an hour. You say, well, why do we care if we get water in the pool? Anybody have an idea? Because if we get water in the pool, we're screwing up the chemistry of the water in the pool. And that's expensive, especially for now, isn't it? Well, that bill, the price of chlorine tablets and stuff is getting exorbitant. So we don't want rainwater mixed in with our pool water because it messes up the chemistry. Then you got to go add chemicals, and then you have to heat the water again, and you have to remove the dirt that came in with the rain. Okay? These other drains are options. This is like I said, the one you can buy at Lowe's. I know you can buy it at Lowe's. Fairly inexpensive. This one's just a bigger version of that. And then there's, this is a cast polymer concrete, pretty expensive. When you're getting into this stuff here, don't get the cast iron grate. But when you're getting into this stuff here, you're looking at $80 to $90 a running foot. So it's pretty pricey stuff. Whereas the Deco drain, you're probably going to get that for $10, $11 a foot. There's also decorative type grates that you can get in stone. Some of the man-made stone stuff is just beautiful. You can buy those drains like that now that can enhance your backyard. Now this one here, we have a little issue with, and here's the problem. Let's see if I can find Bob's picture here. Come on. I'm hitting the button. It's just not moving. There we go. Okay. You see the drain here, and the drain here, and the drain there. And what we usually find out what they're doing is they're usually doing this. They're bringing down to the drain, up to a high point, down to the drain, up to a high point, down to a drain. And so you get these pockets that eventually don't drain well. Then they stand in water, then you get algae growing there and scum around it and all that. It's a terrible idea. I don't recommend round drains on a deck at all. And only time I use round drains is where I'm draining a large area around a spot or something where everything's draining to one spot. Okay, but putting a 1/16 of an inch of water over the top of that drain is not going to make it carry a lot of water. It's not going to certainly carry even a moderate rainfall. It might handle a heavy dew, all right, but it's not going to handle a heavy rainfall. So I'm opposed to this solution here. I'd rather see you do the slot drain whenever possible. I do a lot of work in Florida, and in Florida we always use slot drains of some sort. We never use circular drains or area drains for anything. And Florida gets a whole lot more rain than we get. I figure those guys know what's best, and that's what they want to do, okay? Also, again, you see that problem right there, that he was sloping away from the pool and he's sloping away from the house, and he got that gap right there that's going to hold water, obviously. Now, I have seen, I'm ashamed to say this, but I've seen engineers put slopes of 1/10 of an inch per foot or 1/8 of an inch per foot. that's fine, but your flat work guy can't do that, okay? Your flat work guy can pour it at 1/8 inch per foot, but it won't stay there. Because when the concrete shrinks, it will shrink more than that, and you will get bird baths. And then, so the concrete guy did a really great job, but he left. He comes back a year later, and there's bird baths all over the patio because the concrete can't tolerate that. You need 1/4 inch per foot, 2%. That's what you need for good drainage. If you don't get that, you're going to get bird baths, I'm going to tell you. There's that rock drain here. The problem with this drain, as Bob pointed out, was it wasn't lined. This was just rock. And so the water was free to accumulate in there next to the foundation, wet the foundation on this side of the house. Is this the one that had house damage? That one had foundation problem? Yeah, it had foundation problems, partly because of this, okay? So again, it would have been okay. This detail is kind of attractive. I guess I like that a lot. I'd use bigger rock, but he could have lined that and waterproofed it and put a drain out of it, and he'd been fine. But instead, he just put that rock over the dirt or over some sort of geotextile or something like that, and it leaks into the soil. Well, we'll go back to that. If you're going to do this kind of work right here, you need to be prepared that you're going to build a retaining wall all across that end of the wall, because you've got to support that foundation. You're either going to put a foundation underneath it, or you're going to put in drilled auger bits, you know, the galvanized augers, the flights, continuous flight augers. You're going to have to do something like that to support that house. You cannot leave it like that, and you certainly can't landscape around that. That should have been pinned before they did that work, and not left just left up there in the air. Okay. Okay, with respect to this one here, of course, the drainage, again, as long as I get this waterproof against the building and I get some sort of waterproof underlayment, either polyethylene or Hypalon, Firestone product or whatever, or concrete, I'm okay with doing that. I think you need to give up on putting shrubs there. That would be a terrible place for shrubs anyway. I'm not sure, hope they weren't planning on putting shrubs there, because that's a terrible place for landscaping in the first place. Oh. As he mentioned on the deco drains, those things, that should have been daylighted into a permanent drain, either into a concrete swale or into a larger pipe. Also, you can see what happened against the house. There's separation right there. That would have to be recaulked. All he's got right here in here is a glorified expansion joint and not really an effective drain. And so I'm not trying to knock deco drain. Yeah, I am. Don't use deco drain, okay? I'm just, my personal preference. All right, there's the influence lines again, and then the possible solutions there. And there's the products there again, okay? All right, here's where we get into trouble with the conflicting influence lines. Okay, we got the house influence line, you see that? That's easy. And then you got the pool influence line. Well, the pool is, like I told you, that pool weighs 500,000 pounds. Even a small residential pool is 500,000 pounds. And so, can you see the double crosshatched area? You've got double loading. You've got house loading and you've got pool loading. Well, if the soil's not adequate for that, then you're going to have problems on both the foundation of the house and the pool settling. You're going to get a crack in the pool and you're going to get a settlement on the house. When you go to the building inspection department, I hope they're telling you, oh, you can't build that pool that close to the house. And that's usually all they say. They don't tell you the rest of it. The rest of it is, unless you have it engineered. Okay, so there is a way to do it. Now, what could have been done here? Well, we could have put that house on pier and beam. Sure. I mean, if bad soil's up here anyway, you know, it doesn't hurt. Do void forming and pier and beam. That would have worked. We could have put the pier way on down here, and then it would not have been affected by the pool. Number two, house is already built. Now we're going to add the pool. We could have put the pier and beam under the pool and found the pool lower down in the soil, say 10 feet down, using helical piles or concrete piers any number of different things. We could have put that in there. In fact, in bad conditions, like up around Frisco and places like that, we have put pools on pier and beam with piers, concrete frame, drop the pool in on it, okay? So sometimes you do that. If you have this kind of situation, then you're going to have to either engineer the house foundation or engineer the pool foundation, or both, to allow this, okay? Otherwise, you'd overload the soil right here and cause this conflicting areas of influence, okay? If you don't get anything else out of being here this afternoon, that's what you need. That slide is the one you need to remember. That one ought to give you heartburn, okay? And the codes do not allow you to build that close unless it's engineered, okay? The codes do permit that. Although I've had building inspectors tell me, oh no, you cannot under any circumstance build a house closer than a 45-degree rule. And I said, no, that's not what it says. Go back and read the code. Yeah. Here's a typical, this is how we could have done it with the drilled pier underneath the pool. You see we've put the zone of influence way down here, and the house zone of influence is still up there. Now, I'm still going to have to strengthen the pool wall because it's getting a load from the house. The house is trying to squeeze in on that pool wall. So it's not going to be your basic 6 or 7 inch pool wall. It's probably going to be double mat steel. It might be 10 inches thick. It's going to be beefed up. But again, most of the pool contractors I know, unless they're get into this kind of situation, they're not going to have a structural engineer necessarily look at it. Especially if they're out in the backyard. But once they move up close to the house, they need to have somebody look at this, make sure that this is beefed up and that this foundation is deep enough. And again, I said, I don't think I have a slide for it, but you could have put the pier under the house as well if you were building a new house. And if you had an old house, you could, you can use the, y'all know who O'Shea Foundations is around here, right? You could go in and supplement the foundation with drilled helical piles and hold the house up and build the pool without piles, you see. So there's options for you, anyone, okay? Well, that covers what we wanted to cover today. If you have any questions or anything, you know what, it's so hard to hear in here. I'd be glad to try to field questions, or if you just want to come down here to the front, I'm willing to stay in Dallas a little longer before I go back to East Texas. But I'm going to leave for East Texas before 4 o'clock. All right. Thank y'all for coming.